One day on the ranch, Charlie told Brenda and me that it might be a good time for the two of us to take a vacation. He said we were working too hard for people who were just along for the ride. I felt we were being cut adrift, but he borrowed an old convertible for us, and my sense of adventure was rekindled. We took turns driving a lazy zigzag north, bumming gas at a quarter's worth a station. The convertible didn't actually convert, the top being permanently down. But the weather was warm, so we often wore only bathing suits, stopping at public recreation areas to swim and sleep, and somewhere contacting poison ivy. I have never seen anyone swell up like Brenda did, her delicate face lumping into a monstrous potato head. The cause of this disfigurement was not obvious, and it became difficult to talk attendance out of gas. For days under the hot sun, Brenda's skin wept. She shook herself to keep from scratching, and more than once I turned from the road to see tears rolling down her face, but she didn't complain. North of Santa Rosa, we realized where we were going. On the one hand, it was a might as well idea, but on the other, it suddenly seemed obvious that this was what Charlie had in mind. We arrived in the wooded town of Ukiah just a day or two before Mary, Patty, Ella, Sadie, and Stephanie went to court and were released, trusted to return for another court date the following month. We had a happy reunion packed into the convertible, driving in the open air to San Francisco to pick up Sunstone. Susan exposed her belly to the sun. She couldn't stop talking about the baby boy she had dreamt was inside it. And thanks to Charlie's parole officer and his wife, Sunstone was as sturdy and cute as a bear cub. Charlie was disgruntled to hear us calling Sunstone Pooh Bear when we got back to the ranch. He later told me gravely that when Sunstone was born, he saw an image of the moon eclipsing the sun. He said, "Women have been overshadowing their children for too long." All of the girls came into George's house to meet him. He perked up, politely asking questions about our drive south, and listening to the sound of their voices. I could give you a tour of the movie set like I gave them. We'll walk out of George's house and to the right down this slope along a white picket fence to what George calls the rabbitories, State Park-style wooden restrooms, each with a sink, mirror, and flush toilet. There's a big wash basin and a shower in the adjoining shack. On downhill towards the back of the western set, here's a red shack storeroom, and next door, Randy Starr's special and only trailer. Randy looks like a villain, and he's always mad. We girls only saw his trailer from the doorway since we heard him yell, "Nobody better go messing around in my trailer," as well as, "Get in my trailer and take off your clothes." Clever psychology, but we didn't go in. Not until we had an excuse and he was gone. The inside is cluttered with everything he owns. 10 framed photos of himself, and photos and posters advertising Randy Starr, famous movie and TV stuntman, specializing in death-defying neck drag, and showing a fuzzy photo of Randy hanging from a noose. There are dusty rodeo awards, broken knickknacks, and numerous pieces of larger junk on which to display the smaller junk. There's a rabbit-eared TV, a holey couch, and in the cramped kitchen, a stack of dirty plates. And stashed in his closet, everything from his rhinestone-studded Western costume to his former wife's wedding gown. Those are all the reasons we'd better stay the hell away from his trailer. Next, around back, is a rusty freight car where Larry, the cowboy, lives. He's the small blonde one. He's young for his age, has a metal plate in his head. He'll go along with anything you say. One day, he and Charlie saddled up to scout the territory in case we needed to move the wagon train. Larry keeps better care of the horses since we got here. Likes to show off. Ruby Pearl, the day horse lady, has to keep after him to take his showers, and Benny looks after him too. Benny's the dark-haired cowboy who sleeps in the bunk house. He might be a little backwards, but he's good at heart. He used to be a trapeze man for the circus until he fell wrong and wrecked his leg. He says it only bothers him when it's cold. Benny doesn't yell at the horses like Randy and Larry do, and he's gentle with the kids who come to ride. He's gentle with Larry, too. He and Larry are getting a big ranch in Texas someday, and they're talking about going back into rodeo. Larry has told me about it many times. Leaning against the sliding door of his boxcar, he says, "Yep, I got my Levi jacket in there packed right now." Now, we're in the back of the movie set. We don't come back here much. This porch behind the saloon has been full of broken props and furniture since before we got here. To your right is the barn where about 24 of the horses stay in individual trails. Stalls. Fresh hay bales are stacked in there, and pleasantly pungent smells. And to your left is the wagon shed, housing 2 fine old buggies, a buckboard, a black-fringed funeral coach, and a beautiful full-sized replica of a Wells Fargo stagecoach. George doesn't want us messing with these, and they never get taken out of the shed, except for parades and movies. Across the saddling yard in that separate corral is George's prize year-old Appaloosa stud, Cody. A leopard appy, he says proudly, with perfect black spots, big as your fist all over him. There are a number of horses George says are marked like they came off a carousel. A few that are over 30 years old, but he would make sure they eat good because he says they've worked hard for many a year. Next to Cody are the tack room for saddles and bridles, a pen for mares in foal, and then the haystack. That's 20 feet high of baled hay. Behind it are the corral, the mule, and donkey pen, and the dump. Not for garbage, but for junk. To complete this circle tour, to your left is the little office where Pearl signs in the riders. Here's the payphone, and left again, rounding the corner, we'll step up and walk along the boardwalk in front of the movie set. Here's the bunk house, where Benny and some of the cowboys sleep. It's got one room with a table and chairs, and another with 2 beds, covered in clumpy mattresses and dog-haired blankets. Next is the boarded-up wagon shed, and then the jail with the black wooden bars. And this big log place with the thick double doors is the Longhorn Saloon. Look inside. See the stage? The whiskey bar, mirrors, and all those vintage bottles and props are true antiques. Over there is a huge pot-belly stove, but Pearl says we can't light it. The next room is the Rock City Cafe. It's just a facade and a storage room. and across the sand, we're back at George's. Charlie says the soul of George is living in this tattered town. It's still alive in my imagination. So much happened in such a short time. I was inclined to leave this telling in the present tense as I originally wrote it. People would later give testimony attributing months or even years to what in real time was much less. Time-altering supplements had something to do with it, but there were other variables, including the comings and goings of so many people, each affecting and acting upon the others. Patricia Cranwinkle's bark brown hair parted cleanly in the middle and draped to her elbows. Sometimes she seemed to duck under the weight of it. She was Patty to us before she used an alias at the sheriff's booking desk up north and became Katie. And in my experience, Katie was a real heart lifter, given to humble service, encouraging, giving right of way, yet not so shy as she might appear. Beneath quiet enthusiasm was a singer, an orator, an activist, and so on. But most often she listened, allowing each their hour and their stage. Everyone liked Katie. She was strong, but also delicate, mucking out stalls, washing dishes or diapers. Her slender hands remained milk-white and graceful as a harpist's. Ella was a flashback to the 1920s, if photographs and movies were the standard. She had star-bright eyes and the thin, wavy blonde hair, shorter than most of ours, and parted to one side. Even her expressions were of another era. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked, like a small-town waitress. And she was one of those girls, entirely comfortable in the company of the fellas. I don't remember any problems deciding what to do or who would do it. We didn't have job assignments or schedules. The obvious things to do were whatever was necessary, and someone usually stepped up to the need. Sunstone had full-time supervision from any of his many admirers. Mary, Katie, and Ella often gathered the quilts and sheets, and all of the clothes that were not on our bodies, and took them to a coin-operated laundry in town. They brought everything home, fresh and folded, then hung or stacked them in the closets and made the beds. Another contingent hauled away our garbage and came back with fresh food from the market dumpsters. Then a varying group of women prepared the meals. Almost everyone did almost everything at one time or another, but the women took care of 90% of the food, cleaning, and child care. Charlie was no kingpin in our female drive toward cleanliness and sustenance, but he did influence us by noticing. He wiped his feet at the door, admired the decor, and cleaned up after himself, or else asked for help. In doing so, he set the behavior for the other guys. In less than 2 years, county prosecutors would indict Charlie as a mastermind and dictator. But Charlie didn't dictate by ordering or making rules. Most of us had had enough rules made by people who didn't follow them. He ruled by example. He still had the sharpest eyes and ears, and the most experience of anyone back at the ranch. In the circle at night, we treated him as a kind of shaman, giving him sound space in exchange for his insights. They emerged not in sermon or elevated speeches, but in extemporary, often musical response. And when his humor crept up on us, or we were amazed, or enlightened, or thrilled by what he said. He shrugged off personal attachment to the words. Once, he said, I just reflect thought as it goes by in the air. He could send a dart through the eye of an ego, yet his ability to target disease while leaving healthy thoughts and behaviors drew people to him. I never considered then that he had a different and unique relationship with each person, and only later did I learn others' interpretations of what he said. What I witnessed of his interactions were fostering discovery of the natural world and a human unity I'd never seen or experienced. His leadership qualities were an unspoken fact, but if you asked, he was just living the time of his life. Days at the ranch house. At the ranch house were lit by unusual happenings, realizations, and observations of any wildlife. Learning the ways of wild creatures by coexistence was one of the thrills of our lives. A big spider web decorated our back bedroom, its mistress capturing stray insects, and showing no interest at all in any of us. Lizards sunned themselves on windowsills, honeybees zoomed around in the spring, and mice and wild rabbits crept about at crepuscular hours, keeping well hidden during daylight. Ranchers had killed or driven off coyotes, but we could sometimes hear a pack of feral dogs in the hills, and always, at night, the owls. Charlie and Bobby had a hawk, and Pearl wanted it. Charlie had given her little things, like a vacuum cleaner when she hinted, but the hawk excited her so much that she outright begged to have it. The guys never intended to keep it. They wanted to get to know it till its wing feathers grew back. Then they released it behind the ranch where they couldn't see it flying over the hills and woods. One day, Pearl complained to George that she didn't like a bird flying that close to the chickens. It's a shame the boys let it go, she said. I could have given it a nice home. The evidence is circumstantial, but when Charlie found hawk feathers on the ground in the foothills, we wondered if Pearl had anything to do with it. Factually, we never knew afterward if the bird was alive or dead. We had no radio or TV at the farmhouse. No games, clocks, calendars, and sometimes not even enough shoes to go around. George Spahn called us mountain folk. He liked to play it. George had appropriate manners conveyed in no-nonsense language when conducting business, but when alone with us girls, he used pet names, children's mispronunciations, and a variety of pretended accents, most often like he was born in a cornfield. He said he would teach us mountain talk because it was more highfalutin, and with his nose in the air, he bragged he was so loved in school. They kept him in kindergarten for 9 years. George Christian Spahn, a gentleman, a mountain man, an Irish rogue, and a German businessman, a moving picture man since Silence, says he was a big stock trader and a leading man, says he don't tell people the rest, and he chuckles. And we say, what? He says, I hold the cows and lead the horses. That's a wrangler. You can see his life mapped in muscled arms, red and blue vessels swelling. Old times he drove a milk wagon. Up at 3 a.m. to feed and harness, delivering by 6, running house to house in the snow, wanting to go inside by the fire and eat a cinnamon roll. He was 8 when he started, since his pa died, and he says he used to cry, hurrying through that ice slush, and say to himself, when I'm a man, I'm going to have enough money to eat a whole cinnamon roll on my own every day. LF, circa 1971. George renamed all of us girls. We'd sit in the chair next to his, and his hand would come to rest on our wrists or elbows or knees, and he'd say in his Irish accent, "Who bees it?" When his hand sat down on my knee, I let out a small high pitch, being ticklish. He chuckled about it all day and started calling me Squeaky. For Mary, he employed the Italian, phonetically Marioccia, and Ella was Yellowstone. Bo became Rainbow. Brenda, Brindle, and Katie, Katie did. Ruth, he mishmashed into Weesh, the mispronunciation of a child he once knew, and too many for you to keep track of. Some of the girls were underage, so he didn't need to know about them, and he wasn't asking either. There were younger than legal guys. Paul Watkins for a time. Paul was archetypically California 60s, tan, boy handsome, and flashing straight white teeth. Paul said, "Far out," to convey interest or surprise, and he said it often. A high school dropout he was, in effect, a wandering poet-philosopher, but I more often saw him in the show-off, competitive brat. He watched the way Charlie walked and talked and ran with it as though he had invented it. Most of us imitated Charlie to some degree, and Charlie was more tolerant, reminding us that the guys needed experience. In private, I heard him tell Paul, "If you think to prove, you got doubts." Charlie could compete and be challenging, but he had a distaste for division, and always encouraged us girls to give the young guys a chance, not just for sexual experience, but for the natural human interactions that allow boys to become men. One day, Paul was wandering around, looking for something to do. So Charlie suggested he go back to high school to check out what the other kids were doing. Paul liked that idea, so he picked a local high school and blended in every day for about 2 weeks. He had a good time, and as usual, he scored. When he got back that first day, he reported, laughing, "Everyone's high in high school." I thought of Paul as a boasting loafer, a tripper not inclined to work, and rarely without a pocket full of joints. But, as I recall, we always had a few to pass around the circle each night, and I just toked them for granted. Chuck Gray wasn't a bad kid. At over 6 feet tall, hardly a kid at all. But in the eyes of the law, he was underage. He had lived with the law all his life. Both his parents were police officers. He didn't say so until he realized we wouldn't hold it against him. Charlie told him that the cops had been running us all over the country, and we wondered if his dad could help to keep them off our backs. Chuck rolled his eyes. "He's been on my back for 17 years, he said. "A bully? You could say that. We hardly know each other. All he knows how to do is give orders. They're never at home much anyway, and when they're not at work, they're sleeping." "Are they looking for you?" "Not really. They don't care. But they put on a show because they don't want people to think they're bad parents." Chuck was mansome, with green eyes that looked hungry for acceptance. He shaded that look beneath a low brow and a fuck it attitude, spending most of his time at the farmhouse. And then there was the legendary Steve. I had heard Randy Starr talk about a youngster living in the hills. And when I asked about him, Randy said, he's about 16, a runaway, and crazy as a loon. Just your type.